it had been a busy few weeks in Japan. Following a G7 summit in Tokyo on July the 7th to 9th and the Hokkaido earthquake on July the 12th, the country went to the polls in the weeks between the British and German Grand Prix. Things had not been going well for the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, which had dominated Japanese politics since 1955. A series of scandals and the government's failure to deal with the economic downturn following the bursting of the Tokyo real estate bubble led to several MPs defecting to start their own parties and a motion of no confidence. And for the first time since 1955, the Liberal Democratic Party lost, or at least it didn't win. While it comfortably polled more than twice as many votes as any other single party, it only managed 36.6% of the vote, losing 52 seats, while the main opposition and coalition partner, the Japan Socialist Party, lost a further 66. With the new Japan Renewal Party getting 55, the Japan New Party 35, and the New Party Sakigake 13, all from a standing start. When the dust settled and after the LDP had tried to continue as a minority government, an 8-party coalition took power, led by Japan New Party chairman Morihiro Hosokawa, with a mandate for electoral reform. And now, as requested by Santino Pucetta, on the same day as the German Grand Prix in Talladega, Alabama, the DieHard 500 was run. Now, before I start, a quick disclaimer. My entire knowledge of NASCAR comes from two sources: Days of Thunder and Cars, so this is not going to be the most incisive analysis ever. But this one was quite the eventful race and in emotional circumstances. 1992 Winston Cup champion Alan Kulwicki had been killed in a light aircraft crash in April after 5 rounds of the championship, and then just 2 weeks before the Talladega race, local boy Davey Allison, 3rd overall in the standings last year and with a win and 3 podiums so far in 1993, was also killed landing a helicopter at the Talladega Raceway. Many of the entrants for this year's races were already wearing stickers of number 7 and now added number 28 in memory of Kulwicki and Allison, and the pre-race programme included Allison's uncle Donnie, also a NASCAR driver in his youth, driving his car slowly around the circuit to a musical tribute, a poem by his widow Liz, and a solemn invocation that the show must go on. The cars lined up with current championship leader and 5-time Winston Cup winner Dale Earnhardt down in 11th on the grid, and Robbie Gordon, who'd made his IndyCar debut the previous year, taking over Allison's car. Gordon was actually the first retirement after crashing out on lap 55, and while David Hobbs was talking to him for CBS, on lap 68 there was a really big one, as a 5-way shunt took out pole sitter Rick Mast, Jimmy Horton, Richie Petty, nephew of Richard the King Petty, and local driver Stan Smith. Smith's car, the black number 49, was badly damaged and he suffered a potentially fatal basal skull fracture. Meanwhile, Horton's car vaulted the side of the track and ended up absolutely destroyed at the bottom of the banking, with its driver, dazed but miraculously unhurt, walking away from the scene. Smith was carefully extracted from his car and choppered off to hospital unconscious, while the rest of the field circulated under yellows and finally they could get going again. And then on lap 132, Neil Bonnet skidded, was punted into the air by the car behind, and demolished the catch fencing in front of a bank of fans. Again, the driver walked away, but the race had to be held up for an hour while the fencing was repaired. And then, if there hadn't been enough drama, the fans were treated to the good kind, as Dale Earnhardt, having charged up through the field, was now second in a pack of 5 cars running nose to tail in the final laps, with Kyle Petty, another one of the clan, in the lead, and last year's winner Ernie Irvin behind. With 2.5 laps to go, Petty went high, and Earnhardt and Irvin came through and raced for the finish, with Petty still chasing hard too. They went into the last corner side by side, with Mark Martin side by side with Petty behind them, and in the closest finish in NASCAR history, Earnhardt got the win by 0.005 seconds, with Martin nicking third. Stan Smith, meanwhile, spent 10 days in a coma undergoing multiple surgeries and made a partial recovery, his racing career over and the left-hand side of his face paralysed, but very lucky to be alive. He continued with his drywall business, which had funded his racing, until his death of interstitial pneumonia in 2020 at the age of 71. The Talladega Raceway would install catch fencing all the way around the circuit for next year's race, and NASCAR mandated cars be fitted with roof flaps to reduce the tendency of cars to flip like Neil Bonnet's had. So while I don't think I'll be getting into NASCAR, thanks to Santino to pointing me at that one, and if anyone wants to watch the full 3 hour 15 minutes of it, there's a link in the description. We'll catch up with Nigel Mansell and the IndyCar gang next time. For now, it's time to head to the pine forests of Baden-Württemberg and the Hockenheim Ring. Via Paris, where a decision had finally been thrashed out about the whole driver aids and fuel situation. Very briefly, the status quo for cars was maintained until the end of the season, but for 1994 onwards, active suspension, traction and launch control, and ABS brakes would be banned, as was four-wheel steering, which nobody was using at the moment, but a couple of teams were looking into. But from Hockenheim onwards, rules about non-standard fuel types would be tightened up, though no retrospective action would be taken against those who might have been overstepping the mark. As if to celebrate, the teams unanimously agreed to expand the grid to 26 again, which would no doubt please veteran Michele Alboreto. He'd won his last race on German soil way back in 1985 at the Nürburgring, but hadn't had much luck on Teutonic tarmac since, with fourth in his Ferrari in 1988 his best result since. He'd even interrupted his row of 7th-placed finishes here last year by coming 9th instead. Alboreto's young compatriot Alessandro Zanardi had had a bad week, knocked off his bike in Norfolk by an elderly driver, who then ran over his foot and broke 3 toes. Nonetheless, he had been past fit to drive, though he would do so with a lightweight cast on one foot. Another injured Italian was Pierluigi Martini, who had pulled out of the British Grand Prix assuming he was just a bit out of condition and not reacting well to the G-forces, but had in fact cracked a rib thanks to his harness being done up too tight. He too would be taking the start in Germany. Giancarlo Minardi had problems of his own. Martini hadn't brought enough sponsorship with him to offset the loss of Barbazza's Beta Tools money, his cheques were bouncing, and his bank manager was reportedly refusing to take his calls. Scuderia Italia had money problems too, in this case with team owner Beppe Lucchini having seen things go from bad to worse and was now said to be considering giving the whole thing up as a bad job. The new chassis designed by Sergio Rinland was dead in the water after the two men had fallen out, and the two beleaguered Italian teams were said to be considering a merger. Sauber had also been feeling the pinch, but they were helped by an investment by pharma company British Lighthouse, though that didn't help Peter Sauber's other big problem, JJ Leto's considerable underperformance so far, not helped by the Finns' race engineer Luigi Mazzola having a big tiff with the boss. With Hockenheim being such a power blast of a circuit, plenty of suppliers had brought new updates of engines with them. Ferrari had a new 5-valve V12, while Scuderia Italia got the previous version with its pneumatic valve timing. There was a new G-Series Yamajud for the Tyrrells, and Benetton took delivery of their new Series 8 Fords, which Patrese tested a few days before the race and hit 207 miles an hour, 334 kph, through the speed traps at Le Castellet. But before Flavio Briatore could celebrate too much, it was pointed out that McLaren's technicians were busy installing Series 8s in the back of their car too. The exclusivity contract had apparently expired, allowing Ron to swoop in and buy the latest model from Ford, who for their part would have been conscious that it was Senna and McLaren who stood their best chance of beating the Renaults. With the short-notice decision about fuels, Elf's current brew hadn't been homologated yet, so they reverted to an earlier version to forestall any potential problems. Between the Renaults not getting their full potential and the uprated Fords in the chief competition, the race could end up being close. That in turn would please the fans, who had turned out in their droves to see Germany's new hero, Michael Schumacher. Not since Wolfgang von Trips had a German driver been consistently at the top of the sport, and even then it had been fleeting. Schumacher himself had only won one race so far, of course, but it seemed inevitable that there would be more to come. As at Silverstone 2 weeks earlier, hopes were high, if expectations were a little lower. Michael's manager Willy Weber had certainly been busy. The stores in Germany were packed with Schumi merchandise, while he'd been kept busy shooting TV adverts, doing media appearances and generally being everywhere. He had 32 appearances booked around race weekend alone, and his security team often had to batter their way through huge crowds just to get him to them. It was certainly worth his while. He was said to be raking in a recession-busting $1 million Deutschmarks a year. It was hard to remember that this is just his 23rd Grand Prix. His younger brother, 18-year-old Ralph, and their father Rolf were also at Hockenheim, Ralph driving in Formula BMW and hoping to emulate Big Brother one day. Michael did find time in his busy schedule to congratulate his teammate Riccardo Patrese on his 250th Grand Prix, as did Renault men Bernard Dudot and Christian Kontzen, who stopped by to have a quick drink with their old driver. "I can go another 5 years," said a buoyant Patrese, though Flavio Briatore looked less convinced. Schumacher also found the time to do a bit of racing in among his media commitments, and off they went, with the Williamses not quite as dominant as usual in qualifying, thanks to the difference in fuel but also the way the low downforce setup interacted with their active suspension. Friday saw the local hero second using the Series 7 engine, just 0.6 seconds off Prost's fastest time, while Hill and Senna both suffered problems. Saturday saw most times improve though, and the Williamses took the front row of the grid once more, Hill 0.157 seconds off Prost's 29th career pole. An entertaining duel for third place saw Schumacher, now using the Series 8, pip Senna to it by just 0.035 seconds, both less than 9/10 off the pole time. While the Ligiers were going great guns to monopolise row 3 despite having turned off the active suspension for the weekend, though they were much further back, 1.4 and 2.1 seconds off pole respectively. Patrese was 7th, nearly a second and a half slower than his teammate, followed by an excellent Aguri Suzuki in the resurgent footwork, then Berger and Alesi 9th and 10th after a series of problems, an engine blow-up and a crash for Gerhardt, an active suspension failure and an oil leak for Jean. Warwick was 11th, Andretti 12th after a series of electrical faults, and Herbert 13th in the twitchy Lotus. Zanardi did very well with a foot in plaster to put his example 15th, just 3/10 off Johnny's time. Fellow walking wounded Martini managed 22nd, and as usual the Lolas brought up the rear, Badoer adding to the casualty list with an off and a sprained ankle on Friday and 2 more offs on Saturday, while a more circumspect Alboreto was rewarded with being once again dead last, nearly a full second off his young teammate. Sunday dawned wet and blustery, and the morning warm-up took place in pouring rain, always an extra hazard at Hockenheim because of the way the spray hangs in the trees. Badoer had another problem and pulled over, only to be clobbered by Derek Warwick charging out of the mist. In an accident sickeningly reminiscent of those suffered in 1982 by both Gilles Villeneuve and Didier Pironi, the shattered remains of the footwork shot across the track, hit the gravel trap and flipped over, bouncing upside down through the gravel until finally coming to rest. Berger, Alesi and Suzuki all pulled over to help, and the Brit was extracted from his car and stretchered off to the hospital. That was about 9:30 in the morning. By 12:45 Derek was back in the pits, smiling broadly in a fresh set of overalls and getting ready to take the start in the spare car. Just as after his colossal shunt at Monza in 1990, it seemed nothing could stop Derek.
I feel okay. I've got a bit of a stiff neck, obviously, because going into the gravel upside down sort of compacted my head into the car. But I've been to the hospital and we've had x-rays, and it seems everything is fine, no problems at all. So, you know, to me, I didn't have an accident. Here we are, it's race day, and it's important for us to score points.
To everyone's relief, by that time the sun had come out and the track was dry, and most drivers had opted for the B compound tyres, which would mean a stop, though the Williamses were going to try going all the way through on A's. When the lights went green, Prost was slow away again, while a fired-up Schumacher got a flyer, leaping round him and into second, with Senna following through into turn 1. But not for long, as Prost eased back past on the first curving straight. Or at least that was the plan. Senna stayed alongside as they went into the first chicane, and one touch later, Senna was backwards and stationary, while Prost managed to hold the sliding Williams and continue. The Brazilian kept the engine running, but had to wait for the entire field to stream past before he could pull a 180 and set off in pursuit. So, Hill led Schumacher, but Prost's loss of momentum meant Brundle could get alongside, only to lose the back-end underbraking, take the old line through the Ostkurve, forcing Prost to take evasive action through the escape road. Both rejoined the race, having not lost a position, as Suzuki, crowded out, also took the same route, and Comas pulled off with a broken gearbox. At the end of lap 1, then, it was Hill, Schumacher, Prost, Brundle, Blundell, Patrese, the Ferraris and Andretti, with the top 3 already spread out across 6 seconds or so. Senna was motoring, of course, 25th and last at the end of lap 1 and 20th on lap 2, as De Cesaris was the second retirement with another broken gearbox. With little going on at the front, the director stayed with Senna as he disposed of Boutsen, Alio and Leto and set about his young protégé Barrichello. Actually, the top 3 were slowly closing up, with Hill's brakes slightly suboptimal and Prost really going for it to chase down Schumacher, the gap now 3 seconds across the 3 of them after 4 laps. Soon enough, Prost was right on the Benetton's rear wing. Unseen, Andretti banged wheels with Berger at the Ostkurve and bent his steering arm, pulling off to chalk up yet another retirement and park up alongside Comas's abandoned Larousse. Prost, meanwhile, had pulled out of Schumacher's slipstream and eased past to take second and set off in pursuit of Hill. It just wasn't Warwick's weekend, as he lost control going into the stadium, bounced across the grass and shed a wing, while Suzuki, following too closely, went off in his wake but was quicker to get back on the track. Warwick came in for a new nose, but ended up being stationary for 3 whole minutes. By now Prost had caught right up to Hill, and on lap 8 he simply drove past and straight away started to pull out a gap, while Schumacher looked like he was going to be passed before much longer. Senna, meanwhile, had made his way past Herbert up into 10th, with Wendlinger and the Ferraris next on his hit list. Next time around on lap 9, Suzuki was handed a 10-second penalty for cutting the chicane on lap 1, which he took immediately. And then on lap 10, Prost and Brundle were also shown the penalty board for the same reason. Prost boiled in, presumably turning the air blue inside his helmet, and returned to the track 6th, while Blundell came in next time round and dropped to 13th, and Suzuki was back in too, this time to retire with a transmission problem. So now it was Hill leading Schumacher, Blundell, Patrese, Prost, Alesi, Berger and Senna, who'd now overtaken Wendlinger. And with Schumacher gaining on Hill's apparently ailing Williams, the fans were on their feet, sensing local glory. But whatever had been the problem with the brakes on the number 0 Williams, it seemed to have sorted itself out, and he had first stabilised and now started to increase the gap. So now the best viewing to be had was between their teammates, as Patrese defended 4th from Prost, both just behind Blundell's Ligier, with the Ferraris and Senna just coming into view behind them. One fewer Ferrari on lap 14, as Alesi found his engine cover coming loose, a bolt having sheared, and came in for a swift application of red gaffer tape and a tyre change for good measure, returning to the track 18th, while Senna had now taken up position behind his old buddy Berger, who was occupying the last points-paying place. The Austrian, having moved to Ferrari precisely to get out from under Ayrton's shadow, wasn't going to meekly pull over and let him through, of course, and a fine scrap ensued. Schumacher, meanwhile, had pulled out all the stops, but was still losing time to Hill, and on lap 16, just over 1/3 distance, he locked up going into the Ostkurve and flat-spotted his front right, then vibrated back round to the pits for a new set. Meanwhile, Prost had got ahead of both Patrese and Blundell and was up to 3rd, which now became 2nd, with the German exiting just in front of his teammate. So now Hill led Prost by just over 20 seconds, while Schumacher quickly got back into 3rd ahead of Blundell. Berger, meanwhile, was having a fine time holding off Senna. He was driving the spare Ferrari after his colossal shunt on Friday, and the new engine appeared to have a useful turn of speed to it. Patrese came in for new tyres on lap 20, dropping behind the Berger-Senna battle, while unseen Brundle also came in, missed his pit and had to go straight through, do another lap and try again, which didn't help his race any. No such problems for Senna, who came in on lap 21 for a greased lightning 4.8-second stop, getting back out 9th, while Patrese had a spin on his cold tyres and nearly took out Herbert as he recovered, the Lotus just unable to capitalise and get past Patrese as he got back up to speed, with Fittipaldi in tow, and Senna approaching the lot of them as he climbed back up the order after his own stop. Schumacher had caught up to Prost while the Frenchman passed the battling trio of Warwick, Brundle and Alboreto, but now had to make his way past the lot of them in turn. Alboreto posed no problem, but the two British veterans in their more powerful cars were fighting their own battle as Martin recovered from his own disastrous stop. Hill was still flying in the lead at half distance, putting up another fastest lap as Goodyear looked at the tyres and told Williams their A's should last the race, as they thought. Schumacher had passed Warwick, but Brundle's Ligier was really shifting. Back down the field, Boutsen braked a bit sharply for the first chicane, sending Katayama bouncing across the gravel trap and then in for clean rubber, evidently deemed enough of a penalty in itself as he wasn't given a stop-go as well, while Leto had a terrifying moment when his accelerator stuck down going into the Ostkurve and he bounced to a halt in the gravel. The new checkered flag design on top of his helmet hadn't proved to be prophetic. So it was Hill now leading Prost by 22 seconds, then Schumacher 2.5 seconds behind him, followed by Berger still going non-stop on his tyres, Blundell, who had stopped, Patrese and Senna in the top 7, with Herbert, Fittipaldi and Wendlinger making up the top 10 and not far behind the McLaren. Schumacher was still stuck behind Brundle and losing ground on Prost all the time, while Blundell was now right behind Berger on his new tyres and was looking to succeed where Senna had failed and get past the Austrian. Life was made easier though when Berger ran slightly wide and Blundell pulled out-grunted Berger down the straight and eased in front at the chicane. But Berger wasn't done yet, and he pulled out and toughed it out going into the Ostkurve to retake the place, nearly banging wheels at knocking on for 200 miles an hour in the process. Blundell likewise wasn't leaving it there either and was still pushing Berger hard, as Patrese, Senna and co. bore down on the pair of them. The old stager and relative newcomer were certainly showing that they were both real fighters in the cockpit and providing some great entertainment in the process. Finally, on lap 27, just over 2/3 distance, Blundell dodged out, sold Berger a dummy, and dived inside into the stadium section, leaving Berger looking in his mirrors at Patrese and Senna as the Ligier finally put some sky between them. Senna shuffled up the order on the following lap, moving ahead of Patrese into 6th and resuming his battle with Berger. This time, though, the Austrian wasn't able to make a fight of it, and the McLaren was quickly through, followed shortly afterwards by Patrese, while Ukio Katayama entertained the fans by spinning on a patch of oil and pirouetting gracefully off in the stadium section. Once the replay had finished, he chucked it in reverse and set off again, but only for another lap or so, having broken a half shaft somewhere along the way. Schumacher, having decided he wasn't getting anywhere chasing Prost and with a big lead over 4th place Blundell, came in for a fresh set of boots on lap 32 of the 45, while mostly off camera, Alesi was recovering well from his engine cover woes and had taken 10th off Wendlinger and now 9th off Fittipaldi, who had a broken exhaust, while Brundle was likewise making progress, now 14th and bearing down on a clutchless Alio, who he passed in due course. Brundle's teammate Blundell had been seeing Senna in his mirrors for some time now, but once again that Ligier could really shift, and the McLaren wasn't making much impression. Hill, still way out in the lead, had a tricky moment as he came past Wendlinger and Fittipaldi, scrapping over 9th while also lapping Alboreto in the process. Ahead of Hill once he got through that lot were Alesi chasing Herbert in 8th place, while the director showed off the lovely slow-motion cameras they'd installed last year. Prost was still pushing, setting fastest lap after fastest lap as the race entered its last 10, with the gap now down to 14 seconds as Hill passed Alesi and Herbert. Senna, still unable to make any headway on Blundell, had wrecked his tyres in the attempt, and on lap 42 of the 45, feeling something that wasn't quite right, he peeled in for new tyres thinking he might have a puncture. He was far enough ahead of the chasing Patrese to get back out in 5th, albeit with little hope of now catching Blundell in the last 3 laps. Hill was being held up a bit by Berger, but he was still over 13 seconds ahead of Prost and looking locked on for his maiden win as he began his penultimate lap. And then his left rear tyre burst. Coasting on 3 wheels, he watched Prost sweep past into the lead. Hill tried to limp back to the pits as Schumacher came through into second place to the cheers of the crowd packing the stands, but Damon didn't make it all the way back, spinning off just before the pit entrance. So Prost came through to take win number 51, his 4th on the trot and 7th in 10 races in 1993, with the German fans taking the roof off the stands as Schumacher brought the spare car home 2nd and pulled over to pick up a German flag. Mark Blundell took 3rd and his 2nd podium of the year, coasting to a stop just across the line after a fine drive underlining his credentials. Senna came in 4th, a creditable result after his first lap misfortune, with Patrese 5th, followed by Berger and Alesi, the Austrian getting just his 2nd point of the year, and Ferrari getting both cars to the checkered flag for the first time all year. They had recorded a double finish in Monaco, but only because Berger had torpedoed Hill close enough to the finish to be classified 14th, 8 laps down. That was all the drivers on the lead lap, but a decent tally of 17 finished on a circuit that's usually a real car-breaker, with Derek Warwick gamely still going 3 laps down after his long repair stop, but apparently not willing to give the Hockenheim ring the satisfaction. As a devastated Hill looked on, Prost took to the podium alongside a jubilant Schumacher and a pretty chuffed Blundell. The local hero joked that he was 3rd here in 1992, 2nd this year, so he was looking forward to winning next year. Blundell had some words about Berger's driving, which he saw as dangerous zigzagging, while Berger pointedly praised the mature driving of Senna and Brundle. Martin himself was naturally annoyed about his penalty, especially when it transpired the stewards hadn't actually seen his spin, they'd just seen him going through the escape road. Prost, for his part, was even more livid about it, spending most of the press conference bemoaning the injustice of it and saying it had only been given to spice the race up, though he did spare a couple of words for Damon's bad luck too. So after a great run of races for Prost and a bad run for Senna, it was looking much more like the Frenchman's title to lose than it had been a few months earlier, with the gap to Senna now 27 points, while Hill had dropped further behind Schumacher in 4th. Williams was certainly ever stronger in the lead of the constructors' race, Ferrari had finally overtaken Lotus into 5th, and Ligier were looking on course to make good on Cyril de Rouvre's wildly optimistic pre-season prediction of 30 points. A longer gap now, 3 weeks until the Hungarian Grand Prix, a rather different proposition from Hockenheim in terms of racing, and, Damon Hill would hope, a turn in his luck too.